Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Ducks Gaming and another video on the channel around my league starter for the Raider Reign of Arrows. The video is going to go through hints and tips when leveling on how to make sure you're staying ahead and you're doing enough damage, and a few pitfalls you might come across and how to overcome them. I'm not going to go through this is what you do in Act 1, this is what you do in Act 2, buy this at level 12, buy that at 22. The reason being is I've put together a really detailed POB, but I thought I'd just go through a very quick introduction of how to use it. So in the notes section here, you've got Q&As about questions you might have in the campaign if things start to go wrong. You have stats to look for on your precise technique items once you get to maps. And then it's got information about transitioning to crit and your Eldritch mods. More of this stuff is covered in the main guide. In terms of your skills, you've got trees that are set out act by act, go all the way through to the end of campaign. Then it's got early maps, Uber Lab, after Uber Lab, crit, loads of different trees for you to follow along with. But to make sure you're using everything correctly, the skills are set up the same way. So in here, you'll have different skills for different parts. So for example, when you get to Act 2 and there's different gems you can buy, it will show you what you need to do in those acts. Same as if you get to Act 4, it will show you about changing your ballistas. Act 3, your 4-link setups, replacing Herald of Ice with Anger, like all different things. And it's really straightforward just to follow. So you would pick your Act 3 act. You would pick your Act 3 tree. And then gear, I've just set up. I haven't done campaign gear in terms of this is what you might have in level 1 or 2, or it's pointless because you will use what you can find. All I've done is imported the gear that I had when I started mapping on my first playthrough. My second playthrough, I had way worse gear, and it still went absolutely fine. So it's just a general overview of gear in the campaign. Non-crit, again, I've done the gear that I had when I cleared my Atlas with non-crit. And then crit example is really just changing the bow, the quiver, and adding in a diamond flask. This stuff is all covered in the main guide, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But just to show you how to use the POB, I haven't configured anything on here because I don't want people to get confused about, oh, I've imported mine and my DPS is totally different. So this is what DPS you're going to be doing because there's no resonance count. We've not set this, not ticked frenzies and onslaught or anything like that. It's more for you to follow the skills, the tree, and how it works rather than this is exactly how much your DPS is going to be. So the reason I've set it up like this, as I say, so you can import your character and you don't need to do any config. You just do a direct comparison, DPS against DPS, or life against life, or, you know, evasion against evasion, and see where you are. You just have to make sure that if you want to see how you are with crit, you set your items as crit, you go over to skills and you set your skills as crit, then you go over to tree and you select whatever crit tree you have. So this one would then have your crit tree, your crit items, and then your crit abilities. Just make sure you always have the same one selected. What this also allows you to do is compare how your build is to this. And if yours is, say, half the DPS, you can copy your items into the build and see the difference it makes, and it will tell you whether the item in my POB is better or the item on your character is better. So let's just go into my character that's literally just got into the campaign and copy his quiver. If I then paste that into POB, it will tell me that this quiver, I am 18% less DPS than this quiver here. And then your quiver, once you've added it in, will be added to the drop down here. So we added in this Victory Hail Feather Quiver. So you can just look at the stats, right? It's got LE damage, 16%, small increase damage bows, prod speed, tiny crit chance. What has the quiver that's in this build got that mine doesn't? And then you can go in and have a look. So we could go in here and we could say, oh, it's got crit multi, it's got attack speed, it's got really big damage bows and really big LE damage bows. So you could look at your quiver and go, actually, the stats on my quiver are not terrible. They're just way too low. I need at least double on all of these stats. And it gives you an idea of where you need to do to target your upgrades for your build. Today's video is more of a discussion and a more detailed explanation around how to level through the campaign, some pros and cons, and it might help you decide whether this sort of build is for you. So I've done another practice run in SSF, so I completely reset my Atlas, started again. And after the run, I'd ended up tweaking quite a few things on the tree and the skills, which will be updated in the POB in the main guide. There's nothing drastic. I've just changed the pathing slightly and changed the ballista skill. Now, you don't have to follow my exact pathing, as I go very light on the life nodes. And I think I was doing Merc Lab under 2k life. So if it's not a build that you're comfortable playing, feel free to maybe take a few more life nodes early. But in the campaign, the longer the bosses stay alive, the more at risk you are, regardless of whether you've got a bit more life. So you are much safer stacking DPS than stacking life. It's basically classic POE kill or be killed. I would say gear-wise, in this run, I was really unlucky, and I never really got a bow that I would call good in the entire run. I had an absolutely terrible bow that I went with up till sort of Act 8, and as you can see from a lot of the clips, it really didn't struggle. The damage, because of how broken all of the keystones are that we're taking are, with all them combined, you really literally just need any form of elemental damage on your bow, and it scales through the roof. Now, I did die 3 times, once to Corrupted Blood, once to Splinter Mobs in Act 1, and then I think I traded with a boss. It might have been the Foundry boss. But overall, yeah, it was pretty comfortable. The build can feel a little bit clunky before you get your first lab, so be aware, don't get to Act 3 and think, oh my god, this feels slow, it's terrible, I'm going to give up. As soon as you get your first lab, the build changes completely. You get Onslaught, you've taken the nose to give you extra Onslaught effect. They give you more evasion when you've got Onslaught, so you get hit less, you move quicker, you attack quicker, it just feels really good. I think I didn't even get movement speed boots in this run till about Act 6 or 7 because I had some really good triple resistance boots with no spare prefix and I didn't want to drop my resistances further. I did also run nearly all of the second part of the game under resistance because I just couldn't balance my gear. So I think I was like 55% most resistances until I got to around Act 9 or 10 and I managed to finally balance them. I've also saved down various POBs from different acts. So if you wanted to look at a specific POB that would relate to one of the clips, you can see exactly how I was geared at the time. I've not combined them into one POB as it's a lot of effort as I'll have to set up like lots of different trees, lots of different gear sets. And they're just for your reference. You don't have to go into these POBs. It's more if you can see that I'm doing an Act 7 boss, you can go and open up the Act 7 POB and just see what sort of state I was at the time. The one thing I want to talk about is the ballista setup because Storm Rain is a very, very good DPS skill. I just tend to not use it because of the visual quality of it. It is insane. When you get like 40 or 50 arrows on the ground, my computer sometimes gives up. It's super, super bright. I don't really want to go buy an MTX if there are any available, but it is definitely better DPS. But I'm still tweaking the actual links that would be better. At the moment, I'm running GMP to get as many arrows in the ground as possible. But I think actually, because I run Focus Ballista and you can pre-fire, it's probably not the optimal gem to use because we could add something in like LE damage with attacks, which gives, say, 30% more damage. That's then a massive variable when you take on board the less damage from greater multiple projectiles to the more damage, and we can pre-stack quite a few arrows anyway. I'm thinking it probably isn't optimal to take GMP, but I have no idea, I'll be honest, on that skill. I didn't notice too much of a difference swapping them around, so I'll probably go for not GMP, as to me, the less arrows in the ground, the better, because it saves on my eyes. So in the guide, I recommend going a bit of a longer route to get to Precise Technique, Point Blank, and the Onslaught nodes. But this time I just tried literally beelining for them, and it felt much better. The sooner you get these nodes, and the sooner you make sure your accuracy is above your life, your DPS just skyrockets. It's definitely worth rushing to. So what we'll do is we'll open up a POB. So we'll open up my Act 2 POB, and we'll have a look where I was. And this is what I go for now. It's not exactly rushing because we take a few nodes, but essentially I go over to here straight away, and then here, this just helps with damage on Brutus. It makes Brutus super comfy. We then pretty much have to go down here to get strength and intelligence, and obviously we have to path here, we've got no choice. Then I go quick step just to get more movement speed. You don't have to, you could avoid that and literally just go straight to Precise Technique, then up to get these bow nodes, and then down to Point Blank. And this would be at level 22. So at the end of Act 2, you've got the 3 damage nodes that make all the difference in the build. And that's the way I would do it. And then if we open up another POB, I'll show you what I mean by the fact that I take very little life. If we go and take an Act, let's go just before Act 5, where we do a tiny little respec. So this is kind of what my tree looked like just before Act 5. Once I've gone down here and joined up here, we then do a respec and get rid of all these nodes, but I've actually recorded the footage of me doing that, so it makes sense to actually just talk through that now. So this was me just finding some road markers in Act 6. Obviously, it might not happen in the new league because I've said it's not guaranteed anymore, but I'm sure they'll still drop. It's just to show you that the beginning of Act 6 is about the time you'll have the points to respec. Now, because you do so much damage on this build, I wasn't actually under-leveled. I was pretty much on the level of the zone that I was in because you fire one lot of Rain of Arrows up and it kills so many enemies. It's not like you're rushing through, you might kill a couple and then you keep going. Even when you're not trying to kill stuff, you'll kill stuff on this build. So we'll just go through and look at the respec. So this is kind of what your tree is going to look like. At this stage, it's an absolute mess. but we need to get this bottom joined up to be able to respec these points. So that's what I do with here, because I get my last point. And then we'll apply it. And you can see we've got this sort of very, very long and windy traveling section. And then all we're then able to do is respec these nodes here. And then the tree's a lot more comfortable. It's basically down there and then up here. And then we can start pathing up there. So I'll just let the respec play out. But this is kind of what you need to do. And it's pretty much the only respec you need to do in the whole build. As I say, it's a simple guide. The skill that you get at level 12 is the one you can use all the way through. And that is realistically, other than a few tweaks where you might drop these nodes and then go up here because it's attack speed rather than damage, they're all personal preference. This is the only real tweak that you have to do. So there are a couple of points to talk about in terms of leveling. There's not really much you need to be aware of in the tree that's going to make much of a difference, but there's a couple of respecs that we do. I've already covered the short respec in Act 6 or 7. This mastery here, this is up to you how you do this. You can either run a higher level precision and run precision has increased mana reservation, or you can run a level 1 precision and then a dex accuracy bonus. I think it works better running a level 1 and then you take this mastery here to have green sockets add accuracy. We then take grace reservation. Once you've got both of these two set up is when you add grace into the build. It won't be till Act 9 or 10, but you really don't need it in the earlier acts. You might take the odd death, but it's not worth running grace over a damage aura. Once you've got these two set up, you'll comfortably have enough mana, like you can see here, 167, to run Anger, Grace, and Precision at level 1. And that's the only bit I need to point out, really. The POB is really detailed that I've put in the main guide. And it kind of covers act by act what you need to do and the skills and when you take them. So I'm not going to go through that. And the 4 links, they're very, very close in terms of what's optimal. You've got loads of different gems you could use. You've got like Inspiration, Ellie Damage, Added Cold, Mirage Archer. I would always recommend having Mirage Archer. I reckon it's a good DPS boost. It's probably not quite as good as something like Added Cold, but when we're not attacking, we're still getting DPS, and with Added Cold, we're obviously not. But it's really up to you, and a lot of it is dictated by what color sockets you have drop. Like, don't wait until the perfect colored sockets drop. If there's one that drops and you might have to change one gem, do it. It's going to be better than running a 3-link. As long as your 4-link adds something, it's worth doing, and then you can always switch to the 4-link that you want later on. And when you get to maps, if you follow the trees that I've put down, you won't be adding sort of grace into the setup until Act 9 or 10, but you really don't need it. You don't need defensive auras in the campaign. The first 8 acts are like easy street. It only really gets difficult at 9 to 10. It seems that the bosses get some sort of damage resistance or more health in Act 9 or 10. Like, I noticed I went from shredding things in Act 8 to Act 9 being a bit more tough. So if you do go through with like a really, really trash bow, it's probably around Act 9 you're going to notice the fall off, so you might need to make sure you upgrade your weapon a little bit. But if we just look at the defenses, so I have got an armor flask, and I managed to get evasion on one of my flasks, an evasion flask, and then these obviously don't do anything for defenses. But without anything, we've already got 12.5k evasion because of these onslaught and extra evasion during onslaught, which is why I say go for evasion on your gear, because it's what we can stack up nice and easily. So it's in the campaign. In Act 10, this is a crazy amount of evasion, 12,500. We then stick our flasks on and we've got 21k and 2.5k armor. And then once you get to maps, it is comfy in the lower tier maps. You should not die in lower tier maps unless you get really unlucky with some of the new arch nemesis or whatever they want to call it, new rare mods. You might get unlucky and die once or twice, or there's horrible maps that we have to do for completion, like, I don't know, Bramble Valley, Factory, something like that we know is quite difficult when you haven't got like a lot of DPS. But overall, you should be fairly comfy. And once you hit maps, the things that you want to be aiming for is actually, other than obviously your 5 and 6 link, is defensive crafts from Syndicate. You want Fizz taken as far on your helmet, Fizz taken as far as lightning on your body armor. So this is Corel, the helmet craft. Gravicius is the body armor. And then you are going to want to find Elrion and get his minus mana craft unlocked. You're probably only going to need it on one item, because Rain of Arrows actually doesn't have that bad a mana multiplier, but it's not great. So I would always recommend you run Inspiration, even though it's less damage than Ellie damage with attacks. It's going to keep your cost down. When you go to a 6 link, you are definitely going to need at least 1 minus mana cost craft. Ideally, you'd have 2. Now, I don't want to go too much into mapping, because really it's just a case of completing your atlas, aiming for the trees in the POB, aiming for the skills or roughly the same sort of items that are in the POB. But the one thing that's going to push your mapping straight away is getting your bow upgraded. So if you're like me and you've left the campaign, you're going to have a bow like this, which is T7 flat fire, and then I've crafted lightning resistance on it. As soon as you pick up an Imperial bow and you've got add damage essence, so either, for example, we've got Wailing Essence of Anger and Wailing Essence of Wrath. I want lightning damage to be my predominant damage because it's easier to proc Trinity. So all I'm going to do is roll this essence onto the bow. And I actually got super lucky and got cold as well. So we got lucky, rolled 2 damage mods. There isn't a prefix for me to craft on. So we'll go and have a look if there's suffixes. Unfortunately, I'd rather it not have rolled attack speed because I could have crafted better attack speed, but it is what it is. And there's not really anything on a quiver that I can craft that's going to help. Now what we're going to do to show the difference is I'm going to quickly import this character into POB. Now, I'm not going to set it up. I'm just going to look at what Rain of Arrows DPS is. Now, obviously ignore this, but it reckons it's 13k with this bow. If we then go and take our bow that we've just crafted and we add this into the POB, the DPS goes up 22.8%. So that's a massive DPS increase just by adding a bow that we threw 1 essence at. For the quiver, I'll do the same. Get a feathered arrow quiver. Wait till you get a dread essence, throw it on it. It's going to give you 40% prod speed with bows, which also gives you 40% damage. Anything else that lands on it is a bonus. And that's going to get you going to then start, get a 5 link. You're then going to be able to push GLA maps just on that setup, and then you go from there. That kind of covers it for this video. I hope it helped and give people a bit more insight into whether this build might be for them. I say, I'm not trying to push this build. People just asked me what I was playing, so I brought a video out. I'm not recommending it to anyone. I'm not suggesting it to anyone. I'm just showing you what I'm going to do. And from my practice runs, I know I'm super comfortable getting the Atlas clear with this setup, but it might not be for everyone. If you do have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. There's going to be 2 more videos around this guide to come. There is going to be one for crafting your crit gear, and there's going to be a second one for transitioning to Tornado Shot. The reason I've decided to go with Tornado Shot is Rain of Arrows, although it's functional at red maps, it's not ideal. Whereas if I then transition to Tornado Shot, the gear is transferable. So as I'm building up my crit gear to then pass to my Tornado Shot character, I'm using it on my Rain of Arrows character. So I'm getting this character stronger and stronger, but not for the detriment of the character I then want to spec into. So I will bring a guide out on that into how to look to craft the gear, what to aim for first, and at what point I'm going to transition to Tornado Shot. But I warn people, it's probably going to be like an omniscient setup. So unless you play a lot, it might not be something you transition into very early, but there is easy ways to farm for it, which we'll go through in that video. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. See you in the next one.